Night of March 28, 1942, Saint-Nazaire on France's Atlantic coast. The sky was lit with searchlights, the air filled with German flak. An old British destroyer, HMS Campbeltown, raced full speed into the Normandie dry dock, the only facility on the Atlantic coast capable of servicing the battleship Tirpitz. On her decks, British Commandos gripped Sten guns, Bren light machine guns, grenades, and demolition charges. Their mission was simple yet nearly suicidal. Ram the gates, plant explosives, cripple the dock, and fight their way out. When Campbeltown's bow smashed into the steel gates, the Germans could hardly believe the audacity. In that instant, a few hundred men turned the port of Saint-Nazaire into a battlefield. Explosions tore through pumping stations, fuel depots, and power plants. Small teams fought room to room, often to the last bullet. For Germany, this was more than a tactical setback. It was a shock, proof that a small, determined force could deliver destruction greater than a fleet. This was the beginning of the story of the British Commandos. Small teams, yet capable of enormous destruction. The British Commandos were born out of bitter defeat. In June 1940, after the evacuation at Dunkirk, Winston Churchill ordered the creation of small special units that would set Europe ablaze. Not divisions, not fleets, but teams of a few dozen to a few hundred men, fast, secretive, striking suddenly and vanishing just as quickly. At their training center in Achnacarry, Scotland, young recruits ran mountain trails, forded icy rivers, scaled cliffs, and practiced night landings from wooden boats in stormy seas. They mastered close combat with the Fairbairn Sykes dagger, a weapon that became their icon. They carried compact Sten submachine guns, Bren light machine guns, grenades, and the infamous limpet mines. Small charges that could sink a ship thousands of tons in displacement. The USP of the Commandos was the marriage of small and deadly. They did not need massive numbers or heavy guns. A handful of men, expertly trained and precisely deployed, could unleash destruction far beyond their size. Their motto was, "United we conquer." And with every raid, Bruneval, Vauxhall, Bordeaux, and Saint-Nazaire, they proved it. Boldness and precision could make a small force shake an empire. By early 1942, Europe was almost entirely shaded in Nazi gray. After the fall of France, the Wehrmacht controlled more than 3,000 kilometers of coastline, from the Bay of Biscay to Norway. At sea, the Kriegsmarine unleashed over 200 U-boats. In 1941 alone, they sank about 1,199 merchant ships, over 6.2 million gross tons, turning the Atlantic into a graveyard of convoys. In the air, the Luftwaffe waged the Blitz, killing over 43,000 civilians and destroying nearly 2 million homes. For Londoners, the fear of death falling from the night sky was real. Churchill knew Britain was not ready for a large-scale offensive. The army was depleted after Dunkirk. The Navy stretched thin guarding convoys, civilians weary under nightly bombings. To sit idle meant slow exhaustion of morale. To gamble on a major counterstrike risked catastrophic defeat. Hence Churchill's famous directive. Enterprises must be prepared with specially trained troops of the Hunter class who can develop a reign of terror down the enemy coast. This was the birth of the Commandos. Meanwhile, the Germans were building what they called the Atlantic Wall, a chain of concrete bunkers, coastal guns, and Würzburg radar towers stretching along the coast. Hitler believed it impregnable. Yet within this wall lay gaps. The Commandos, though too few to seize territory, could slip through, destroy, and withdraw. forcing Germany to scatter its forces across a continent it already struggled to hold. In other words, across a Europe under the Nazi heel, the Commandos were the small but razor-sharp dagger aimed at Germany's weakest points. To turn small bands of men into a razor-sharp weapon, the British armed their commandos with weapons light in weight but devastating in effect. The first symbol was the Sten submachine gun. So simple it could be built in hours for less than $3, yet capable of firing 500 rounds per minute from a 32-round magazine. Weighing barely 3 kilograms, it was perfect for night raids where speed mattered more than pinpoint accuracy. For heavier firepower, the Commandos carried the Bren light machine gun, a top-fed 30-round magazine, firing about 500 rounds per minute, with an effective range of 600 meters. The Bren gave small teams suppressive fire and cover to break out under pressure. But in the dark, the most feared weapon wasn't a gun at all. It was the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife. Its 18-centimeter double-edged blade was designed for silent close combat, and it became the very emblem of the Commandos. Yet the deadliest tool was the limpet mine, a magnetic charge of just 5 pounds, 2.5 kiri, capable of crippling a vessel of thousands of tons. In the Frankton raid on Bordeaux, a handful of limpets disabled multiple German ships and shut down the harbor for weeks. Transport was as crucial as weapons. At Saint-Nazaire, the British turned the old destroyer HMS Campbeltown into a floating bomb. Stripped of guns, reinforced at the bow, and packed with nearly 4.5 tons of explosives. At Bordeaux, Commandos paddled folding cockle-McAtoo kayaks, 15 feet long, weighing under 30 kilon, silently gliding upriver in darkness. Against their foes, the Commandos were always outgunned. German troops manned MG-34 machine guns, firing almost 900 rounds per minute, defended by Würzburg radar and concrete bunkers. But by striking where least expected, with speed, surprise, and light weapons, the Commandos overturned that advantage. This was their true USP. Instead of meeting strength with strength, they turned everything in hand into a weapon, from a cheap submachine gun to a dagger in the dark to an old warship reborn as a giant bomb. Dawn, March 28, 1942. Saint-Nazaire, Atlantic coast of France. The engines of HMS Campbeltown roared as the old destroyer rammed full speed into the massive steel gates of the Normandie dry dock. German guards scarcely had time to react before waves of British commandos leapt ashore, splitting into small assault groups. Amid the glare of searchlights and the thunder of gunfire, teams of 3 to 5 men rushed power stations, pumping houses, and fuel depots. One German officer later reported, "The surprise was so great we believed an entire division had landed." In truth, only about 600 men, commandos and sailors took part. They fought fiercely, many to the last bullet. Surrounded groups resorted to grenades and the Fairbairn Sykes dagger in desperate close combat. By daylight, most of the raiders were dead or captured, 169 killed, over 200 taken prisoner. Hours later, the hidden charges within Campbeltown detonated, ripping apart the dock gates. The Normandie dry dock flooded, twisted into wreckage. The only facility capable of repairing the battleship Tirpitz was gone, never to function again throughout the war. 9 months later, another tiny band, just 10 men, etched their story at Bordeaux. In Operation Frankton, they paddled folding cockle-McAtoo kayaks 60 miles up the Gironde, beneath German patrols. By night, they dove beneath the docks, strapping limpet mines to hulls. The result, 6 German ships destroyed or heavily damaged, Bordeaux's harbor crippled for weeks. Only 2 survived. The rest were captured, many executed under Hitler's Commando befehl. 2 raids, 2 truths, small teams, prepared for sacrifice, inflicted destruction vastly out of proportion to their numbers. For Germany, it was a shock. A handful of men could alter the fate of an entire coastline. As the sun rose over Saint-Nazaire, the harbor had become a scene of devastation. The Campbeltown erupted in a colossal blast, its shock waves shattering windows for miles. Thousands of tons of steel twisted, the Normandie dock gates ripped apart, seawater pouring in. Germans inspecting the wreck were hurled into the air. Over 360 soldiers and engineers killed in the explosion alone. For Britain, the raid was hailed as the raid of the century. Out of 601 men who set out, 169 were killed and more than 200 captured. Yet the one target that mattered, the only dry dock capable of housing Tirpitz, was permanently destroyed. Parliament erupted in applause. Newspapers called it a direct slap in Hitler's face. 89 decorations were awarded, including 5 Victoria Crosses. At Bordeaux, a mere 10 men left the harbor crippled for weeks. Material damage was smaller, but the psychological toll on Germany was immense. One German naval officer admitted, "We could not comprehend how such a small force could inflict such disproportionate damage." Hitler's response was swift and brutal. In October 1942, he issued the Commando befehl, the Commando order, mandating that all captured raiders be executed on the spot, denied the rights of prisoners of war. It was proof of the fear these small units had instilled. Meanwhile, after the archery raid in Norway, Hitler shifted tens of thousands of troops and built fortifications along the coast, stretching his resources thinner. On paper, the raids were small, hundreds of men, a handful of ships damaged. But in strategic terms, they mirrored the effect of the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. Limited physical destruction, enormous psychological and strategic impact. For Britain, it was proof that even when standing alone, they could still strike. For Germany, it was a warning. Even the smallest cracks could bring down the wall. By numbers alone, the Commando raids might seem minor. A few hundred men, a handful of ships sunk, a single dry dock destroyed. But their true significance went far beyond that. First, for Britain, they were a vital boost to morale. In the dark years of 1940-41, after Dunkirk and the Blitz, the people needed proof the Empire could strike back. Saint-Nazaire, Bruneval, Bordeaux proved that dozens or hundreds of men, trained and daring, could make an empire tremble. Second, for Germany, the impact was deeper. After each raid, Hitler was forced to scatter tens of thousands of troops to guard the coasts of Norway, France, and the Low Countries. The so-called Atlantic Wall was already being eroded in 1942. By 1944, at D-Day, that dispersal left the Wehrmacht unable to concentrate its strength. The loss of the Normandie dock meant Tirpitz could never freely threaten the Atlantic. Third, in the long run, the Commandos laid the foundation for modern special operations. From their example came Britain's SAS, America's Rangers, and later Navy SEALs. The lesson was clear. Wars are not won only by divisions and fleets, but also by small elite forces striking at the right place and time. Compared with the Pacific, these raids were Britain's Doolittle raid. Limited physical damage, but immense psychological and strategic impact. They proved that in war, the greatest value of an action may lie not in what it destroys, but in the belief it restores, and the fear it plants in the enemy. That was the true legacy of the British Commandos. Small teams, capable of rewriting history. The raids of the British Commandos did not change the war overnight, but they spread fear through German ranks, restored faith among the British people, and opened a new era, the era of special operations. From fragile kayaks on the Gironde to an old destroyer-turned bomb at Saint-Nazaire, they proved that sometimes a small force can shake an empire. If you want to keep uncovering the stories that seemed minor yet shifted the course of history, stay with us. This is Oblivion Archive, where the forgotten fragments of World War II come alive through image and voice.